Washington sent its first few official visits.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Lars, we've got a really fun show coming at all day, every day today. First, couple of things. Want to make sure we get out there wherever you're watching this video, YouTube, if you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Music, make sure you hit that follow, that subscribe button. It does really help us out a lot as we get into the offseason. We've got so much fun stuff coming at you. We're on all forms of social media as well. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Follow us at Locked On Huskies. So much going on there. And as some of you might notice, I'm wearing this Aurora University football shirt today. Shout out to one of our everydayers, John Weedston, for sending this to me. He said, hey, this is my alma mater. I played football here. Would love it you were on the show. I said, absolutely. Let's make it happen. So, John, shout out to you for that. Appreciate it. We got a whole bunch of fun stuff coming at you today. Lars, this is going to be a little bit different. We're talking some basketball. Combine that a little bit with what's going on with Nate Robinson. Our buddy Christian Capel wrote a fantastic piece about that. Make sure you go check that out over at On Mountain Lake. We'll get there. We're going to do a new sort of a unique segment here where we're going to provide some of our background from the amount of time we spent doing this. Lars, you have a wonderful story about New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore and when he almost came to UW. We'll get there as well. But Lars, Washington has sent its first batch of official visits. Really interesting. So 3 players right now, according to 247 Sports, will be taking their official visit for Washington's spring game. 2, not surprising. Derek Colman-Brusa, number 1 player in the state of Washington. He's supposed to be coming up for an official visit that week. So is David Schwerzel, number 2 player in the state, according to 247, O'Day High School edge rusher. And then the third one, interesting. Tyson Bacon, Tennessee commit from Hoover High School in Alabama, 3-star defensive lineman.
So let's go with the furthest and we'll work our way backwards, because that's the one that I think we had talked about him on the show, where they're making a clear concerted effort to find some talent, especially along the defensive side of the ball, specifically along the defensive line. Let's call it from Mississippi East. Not even like Oklahoma and Texas. I'm
sure.
A little bit even further, like Louisiana, that like middle tier, that third tier of the country eastward. Because as Matt Doherty said, as we said on the show, like that's where the bodies come from. And I remember that was an offer that they made, and I don't know if that was a Kafusi offer or if that was a Hawkins-Richardson offer. Doesn't make a difference because they're clearly in the game for him. But that was an early offer when they made that swing with, Caleb Smith and offering the 25 and 26 guys. They threw in some 26 ones as well, and I think Troy was one of those. I could be mistaken on the timing of that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And so you look at the guys that you want to get, you need to get somebody from the South if you're going to make this effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So seeing this happen with Tyson is really interesting, just because, this is exactly what we talked about when you talk about the offers of maybe not the highest rated guys, but somebody who's got a whole bunch of offers, committed to Tennessee right now. And real quick, Lars, another guy we should probably spend 30 seconds on here, speaking of Tennessee, is Anthony Jones. He cut his list down to 3 on Monday, one of Washington's top edge rusher targets, 4-star out of Crean Lutheran High School in California. And he's down to Washington, Tennessee, and UCLA. He told 247 Sports that Tennessee is probably the leader right now. I'm really curious. I think this is a very tight battle right now between UW and Tennessee, because he's going to be up for his unofficial visit for Washington's junior day on March 8th. UW is the only school of those 3 that he hasn't set an official visit date with just yet. So it seems like there's a lot of time for Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff to make up some ground and get in the race there, where I really don't think they're that far behind either, because this is a guy who was very interested in UW under Kalen DeBoer with William Inge, and that's one of the reasons he's considering Tennessee so highly, is his relationship with William Inge. And now with UW, with this new coaching staff, still seems very interested in that. So I like where UW is trending in that direction as well. Just wanted to make sure we got that in there.
And then you throw in a Kaika with UCLA. It's a great UW trio there working against. But the reason why I say that is because, again, William Inge has been at Tennessee for at least a year. Kaika has been at UCLA for more than a couple of years. The common denominator is not UW, because Aaron Van Horn, as we mentioned earlier, I think last week or sometime recently on the show, where it's no slight to Aaron. Again, I think he's actually going to be a decent coach. When you look at the pedigree that he has, the experience that he has at Michigan, all those sorts of things, but he's playing catch up. And nobody wants to be playing catch-up, especially when we're talking about 4 stars and you're competing against SEC and top-tier Big Ten schools. I'm not counting UCLA as a top 10 Big Ten school. I'm just saying other
way.
schools. I'm just saying other schools that you're recruiting with other kids, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State for Derek Colman-Brusa, for example. All these you're playing catch up for. So it's intriguing that some guys are coming up on that March 8th and 9th weekend for an unofficial, and then we're already having some guys talk about their officials. And so it seems like there's like a kind of staggered 2-tier system where it's like, hey, there's the first tier guys, and then we're probably going to find some guys in the second tier as well. And that's good because we saw last year, there's a couple of guys, that came in early, and then you add Victor Sanchez-Hernandez. So you can make it work with both tiers. You just can't have it strictly be that second tier. And so I'm curious to see how many more guys come up in that March window and then return in May.
So one thing I want to talk about is that May weekend right now. I'm just very curious about this because when we watched this all happen for the spring game last year, let's run through the guys who officially visited in May for the spring game last year. Didn't turn out the way you might have hoped. Douglas Utu goes to Oregon. Vander Plug, we know what happened there. Ladarian Clarity ends up at Ole Miss. Champ Talialia obviously signed with Washington there. CJ May, Tristan Keeney McMillan, and Donovan Alubade. That was the group of official visitors that came in for the spring game weekend. So you're looking to have a little bit of a better return there in 2026. And Lars, I feel a little bit better about the way this has started off. And a big reason for that for me is David Schwerzel, where I watched that kid play. He got invited to the Polynesian Bowl, which is really cool to see because he is honestly one of my favorite players on the West Coast. When you go and you watch his film lining up across from FACLA, you can see the way they play off each other, which is really cool. And I think that's really important in all this, not just because, they're teammates over at O'Day, one of the, top local programs and everything like that, but because he knows what it's like to play across from another college edge rusher. And you can very clearly see the way they've communicated throughout the years it's just they're very in tune with one another and know how to play off each other. They know how to line up all over the formation and do a whole bunch of different things. And with David, I'm personally in the camp of I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at Washington with the Taylor Mays and the Stafford Mays connection with the way that O'Day has been historically very good to UW. So I look at all that and I say I like that getting a guy like that in really early to potentially be one of those, I don't want to say headliners of the class because he is a fantastic piece, but one of those big time recruiters in the class where it's, hey, come up to Seattle. You got one of those local guys in the boat really early. Obviously, I have a couple others in Terrence Sarian and Wasila Lobi in the boat as well. But having another guy from Seattle, especially at such an important position of need, would be crucial for this class.
And you add to it, we know Derek's going to take a little bit longer, even though he's coming up for his official, as you mentioned, in May. FSCLA, I'm curious when he'll make his decision. It'll probably be a July, August decision. Maybe he stretches it into the season. I don't think so. But the reason why I'm glad you mentioned that Schwerzel could be the first is that could then, I'm not saying put pressure on a guy like Derek Colman-Brusa or FSCLA, but it starts to make those guys think even more. It's like, okay, if he bought it,
yeah.
What now the gears start turning a little more. And I think that'll also help where if I'm assuming FSCLA and David Schwartz will have a tighter relationship with Jason Kapusi more so than Aaron Van Horn. But if Aaron Van Horn can make up that ground and say, hey, you know what, I played a role in his commitment. Like yes, obviously Kapusi helped and Ryan Walters helped because this isn't just a one-man game here. But then you can then look at Derek and say, hey, Derek, now we got a UW commit in the state at your position, or at least along the defensive line coming up. And when you got, because then if let's say he commits let's say Schwartz commits before the spring game.
Sure.
And then it ends up, visiting for that weekend again, then you're having more guys. Like if you have Wasi, Terrence, Ansu Sonoe, those guys come up. Now you're starting to be like, okay, cool. This is starting to try to be a good class. But one intriguing thing that you mentioned with that, with Tristan Keeney McMillan committing last year, Brady pulled the trigger? Or is he going to be a little bit will? Because I think if you could somehow find a way to get him on campus for that weekend, that would be the Donovan Alubade, the big name that you're looking for in that regard.
So I agree. I think that one's going to be a little bit more drawn out based on a recent interview he did with On3, where he talked about taking 5 official visits, and see, he still wants to commit somewhat early. So I don't want to rule it out, but I think that's one of those ones that you just got to keep a close eye on because he has named Washington toward the front of the pack of schools that he's really interested in at this point in time. So that's kind of going to be a wait and see. But Lars, speaking of quarterbacks, I don't think a lot of Husky fans know just how close New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore was to becoming Washington's offensive coordinator. But we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. I'm currently looking for a new couch, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and budget. My favorite part, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for the larger items. Wayfair's site was so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or budget. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So Lars, before we dive in on this journey of, this alternate reality that we're about to go down here, this is going to be something that you and I wanted to implement over the course of the offseason, because you've obviously been in the game for a long time in this space. I've been, in the Husky world directly here in Washington for about 5 years now. So we have learned a lot, let's just say. And there's a lot that we have not shined a light on or brought to the light of day for one reason or another, usually, journalism stuff. But this is one that today, after Kellen Moore was named the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, it needs to come to light.
So, and I'm glad it is, because I remember having this discussion with you, I think back in 2020 when it was
first time we met,
right, where it was, okay. So let's go all the way back here, because we have to go back to 2019. Actually, there was a basketball game that I didn't attend that might have played a role in this too, but because it was right before COVID and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So when Jimmy Lake took over for Chris Peterson, Junior Adams stayed on staff. The presumptive understanding at the 11th hour, I believe, as of like mid to late January, was that Kellen Moore was going to come up to take the offensive coordinator job at Washington for Jimmy Lake. Came up, did an interview. Everything went to a basketball game. Everything was ready to be signed. And this is what's going to piss everybody off. And the only thing that I can say on the record is for a couple of different reasons. I don't want to out anybody specifically, but there was an understanding of, hey, this is a great job, and obviously you would probably kill it as Washington's offensive coordinator, but maybe just stay where you are and kind of, see what happens, move things forward. UW ends up with John Donovan, the antithesis of Kellen Moore, and the 2020-21 season is what it is. And Kellen ends up, staying in the NFL. And I think we had both, tying this whole thing back together with the conversation that you and I had, is, well, if Kellen had come up, would he have stayed more than 1 or 2 years? Because we both know that Jerry Jones was very fond of him to be the Dallas Cowboys head coach. That didn't happen either, which is kind of surprising in its own right. But, Jerry is Jerry, so I'm not going to explain Jerry Jones. But now that he's going to take the New Orleans Saints job, it's one of those things where Kellen, had the chance to come back to college after Washington. He had a chance to go to Boise State, ended up not taking that opportunity, which I don't blame him for, because in the midst of that COVID run, you didn't want to be a first-time college coach trying to learn everything new. And the reason why Kellen, I think, ultimately didn't take the job, if Chris Peterson was the head coach, he's the offensive coordinator. Yeah. When I'm not saying it's just Jimmy Lake, because I don't want to paint Jimmy in that light, because I don't think that was solely the reason. Kellen didn't come up for the interview and say, oh, wait, Jimmy's the coach. Oh, never mind. No, he knew Jimmy was the coach. He knew he interviewed with him and all those sorts of things. But I think there was more of a tie-in with Junior and Chris Peterson than there was with Jimmy and Chris Peterson. And this takes me kind of in a way to Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb, where Grubb wanted to run a certain offense. Mike McDonald wanted a certain offense to pair with his defense. They were not married together. That was not a happy marriage. And I think that would have been the same result with Kellen Moore, where, we saw how Jimmy Lake's tenure ended. I don't necessarily know. And I think Kellen made the right decision, but it was, I will say, we're like 85%, 90% there. And all he had to do was that last 10% to sign the contract. And that 10% ended up changing the course of his history and UW's history as well.
So this is a really interesting alternate timeline to go down, because let's say that does happen, right? The COVID season, there's not a lot you can do about that, where maybe that looks a little bit different, but they went 3-1 and you said, okay, you see what's going on here. You feel like this might be a positive for one reason or another. Everything else obviously was kind of messy going on behind the scenes, especially in the world of recruiting, as we saw play out with a whole bunch of different things as that went forward. But I think about this a lot, because what does that 2021 season look like? I have a feeling that, one thing that went along with John Donovan was this commitment to running the ball and this commitment to getting the offensive line as gigantic as humanly possible is the best way to put it. It was one of the heaviest offensive lines in the country. I remember it was back at Husky Hall writing an article saying, yeah, in terms of like just total weight and average weight per member, it was, I believe, top 5, top 10 heaviest offensive lines in the country. And we saw when Dylan Morris was under center in 2021, dropping back to pass, we saw the way that everything looked. It was just ugly, to say the least. And I remember a lot of people blaming that on Scott Huff, which was just not at all, his fault. Yeah, and we saw that. We saw that going forward in 2022, 2023, why it was not Scott Huff's fault, which was great to see him just be kept around. But in this alternate world with Kellen, I think we're looking at just, a timeline where Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan, maybe they develop a little bit differently. Maybe they develop a little bit faster where, obviously Junior Adams, he was not Jamarcus Shepard. Like, I think Junior Adams is, he was a really great recruiter, but I just think Jamarcus is a better developer. Just full stop. Now Junior's in the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, everything like that, which is one of the reasons you mentioned him, which is interesting to see how that worked out. But it's a really interesting thing to think about where, if all of a sudden you're utilizing somebody like Rome Odunze, somebody like Jalen McMillan, as they continue to put on weight. Cause I remember just watching them just not be able to be physical enough really early on in their college career, which is, not surprising for true redshirt freshmen just coming straight out of high school, especially during the COVID year with the way everything worked out with that. But I just think about how different it could have been because, maybe in an alternate timeline, Michael Penix doesn't come to UW if Kellen Moore's offense is, going a certain way, and maybe they don't go 4-8. Maybe just things aren't as messy as they ended up being.
Well, then let's not forget Puka Nacua is still on that roster. Like maybe Puka's.
I don't think that's that.
No. But I'm saying he could have had more production in 2020. But again, now COVID, that kind of threw a wrench into everything. But there's just so many different potentials that you could have gone with it. And then what would that have done for Sam Heward? Would Sam Heward not have been shell shocked in the Apple Cup, which was just criminal coaching on everybody's fault there? I will throw the entire staff under the bus for that one because that was atrocious. Like I won't. Okay. Before I go down that rabbit hole, let's stay on this rabbit hole because you look at it and think what would it have been different? Yeah, but what's not to say Kellen left after 21?
Sure.
Like, and because that was the thing. But that was the understanding with Kellen was I don't think he wanted to be a long-term college coach, especially given his acumen in the NFL. And that's no slight to, what Kellen could do in college. But we see this all the time. And it certainly since 2020, 21, college has gotten worse in that regard for coaches where it's like, do you want to be a first-time college coach in the transfer portal era? At that time would have been, 2021, just starting the portal and those sorts of things. And it's like before NIL, it's like, no. Now could he jump in? Maybe. But I don't. Now he's going to do it as a head coach. Now you forget offensive coordinator. Like there's no way that Kellen Moore goes to college unless it's as a head coach. But I don't think that's just what he wants to do. And keep in mind, his dad, Tom Moore, ended up allowing Junior Adams to live on his couch when he was getting his coaching career started the process. Yeah. So like there's a whole lot of family tie-in. So that's where Junior ties into the Cowboys, just for people that want to know about that. But you look at it and think, okay, with all of that being said, like, yes, it would have been monumental. But I think the only reason it would have worked, it would have mattered, and this is another story for another day because you probably do an entire show on this, that 2019 season with Chris Peterson. If Peterson doesn't quit, and I'm going to use quit, no disrespect, but it was quitting, especially how abruptly it happened, then this is a lot different story because I think if Peterson was building off of 3 10-win seasons, aside from the 2019 8-4 season, you got the recruiting classes, you had all that momentum coming in, and I think it was just a sign of like, man, UW was almost right there with Chris Peterson. Maybe you have Kellen and then Junior and Keith Bowen, and you just run through that staff, and it's a lot better. You don't have, and I don't think Scott Huff gets the questions in 21 that he got with Kellen if he's the offensive coordinator. So
I agree with you there. It's just I look at this more of the alternate timeline because I don't want the everydayers to be like, oh, are you saying that you wanted Jimmy Lake to be kept around? That's not what we're saying at all. That is no part of any of this. It's just interesting to think about what that would have looked like because maybe in some timeline again. You don't see some of these guys transfer to UW that did. Maybe you don't see them build the way they did with Kalen DeBoer, with Ryan Grubb for those 2 years, what that turned into, because we're just looking at a completely different coaching staff where John, like there were obviously a lot of other things that were the downfall of Jimmy Lake, but John Donovan was the one that really just jump-started everything, because maybe you don't lose to Montana. Maybe you don't have one of the worst offensive performances I've ever seen in my entire life in that game. And it's just, there's so much to think about around that, because it does change everything. It changes everything in recent memory. Maybe this isn't, the only team in the Pac-12 era to reach the college football playoff multiple times. Maybe it's not. And we're not trying to say that, it would have gone this way or anything like that. We just wanted to bring these facts to light, because you, as the everydayers, you deserve to know what was going on behind the scenes. Now that there's 5-6 years been removed from everything that happened, but it's really interesting. Say all that to say, let us know what you thought. Leave us a comment down below if you want to hear more of those stories. Maybe ask us any questions if there's any particular stories you want to hear more about, because we've got a lot of those. But Lars, we got to talk about Nate Robinson. So Lars, shout out to our good friend Christian Capel, friend of the pod, who did a fantastic story about Nate Robinson, who received his new kidney on Friday from a UW fan named Shane Cleveland. And now seeing that he's in the recovery process, that's just really great to see.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where you just every story kept coming out of, hey, Nate's not doing too well. Nobody's got a match. And I'm like, how are you in the city of Seattle with over 500,000 people and nobody's a match? Come on, someone's got to be a match here. You look at, and Nate's such a good guy. I mean, again, peek behind the curtain. I remember running into Nate at the COVID sevens. Another COVID die-in. Here we go. Yeah. And it was one of those things where he's always been a great ambassador for the program. He's been a great ambassador for the school, and he's just a great person. And so when we found out about the diagnosis, it was like, oh damn, that's real serious. And you fast forward. People are like, oh, hey, I'm not a match. People tried and it didn't work or whatever the case may be. And it was finally just out of the blue. Kind of almost like, hey, you know what? I'm a match. Well, let me do this. Yeah. We can't lose Nate. We can't lose Nate. There's not like this, especially when there's a way to help him. And so finally, you talk about the reach of Husky Nation, the reach and the impact that sports can have. This is that type of moment where humanity meets sports and they come together for a better cause. And so for all the people that are like, oh, what do sports do? It's like, sports got Nate Robinson a kidney and kept him alive after Nate gave his life to sports. Now somebody who couldn't play sports gave Nate a second life.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about it, where let's go down that road for a minute, where people have asked me, I'm sure they've asked you plenty of times, why do you do what you do? It's, there's a lot of work that goes into it. It seems like it's tiring, long hours. It's because of stories like this. It's so great to hear. Just, not only was this, I loved watching Nate growing up. One of the quotes in the story, we're not going to give away everything in Christian's story. You got to go read it for yourself. We'll drop the link to that in the description below, by the way, if you haven't been able to find that. But I read all that and I say, this is why we do this, Lars, for stories like this, for moments like this, because sports have that kind of impact on everybody, and it's awesome. And it's just so wonderful to see that, and to, just parlay this into this really important week that's coming up for Danny Sprinkle, for this men's basketball team, which starts on Wednesday at Ohio State. There were so many moments like that for me, and I'm sure for you growing up where you were in this area. Obviously, I was down in LA, where the one that always stands out to me is Isaiah Thomas's buzzer beater against Arizona in the Pac-10 championship, where that was just, truly, truly wonderful. Also, fun side note on that as well, where growing up, when I was still playing college baseball and everything, I used to go to a gym in Southern California, shout out the Factory, where one of the trainers there was the same trainer for Drew and Justin Holiday. And I know I said this at the time. I got to meet them once, work out with them for a couple minutes. I'm the only person in the history of the world to meet both those guys in the same place and be more excited to meet Justin, because I loved watching those UW teams so much. Those were just truly elite memories. But again, to get back on track, Danny Sprinkle wants to make more of those memories. Danny Sprinkle wants to do that because that's what he grew up watching. That's what he grew up enjoying with his father, who played UW basketball. And when I think about just everything that this team can be, it's been this close, and it seems like it's getting closer, because Tyler Harris is really improving. We're seeing more from Makai Mason. We're seeing more from Zoom Diallo. We know he had a lot of turnovers in the second half, and Danny alluded that's why he was benched for the end of that game against Northwestern. But all the pieces are there, and if it's going to come together, and if you want to try to get into the Big Ten tournament, now is the time. Now is the opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw somebody posted their Big Ten power rankings or whatever, and Washington was at 15. I'm like, hey, so if that holds, Washington would be the last school in. It's like making the NCAA tournament. It's like last four in, first four out, sort of thing. And it doesn't matter what it does matter a little bit what you do in the tournament. But let's say UW wins 1 or 2 games in the Big Ten tournament. You're not going to win the tournament. Crazier things have happened. Shout out to Danny if you do it. I don't think anybody's going to bet that Washington's going to be even in the semifinals or the finals of the Big Ten tournament. But if you can get a couple extra wins, stack a couple extra wins, end the season on a positive note, send the seniors out in the right way. And then also, you mentioned Zoom Diallo, Nate Robinson, Isaiah Thomas. What do they all have in common? Washington. But with that being said, Tacoma Native, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But with that being said, you look at the face of the park, and that's why these stories are so important, is because you kept Zoom for a reason. Zoom, I went down to his commitment when he committed on ESPN, and everyone's like, oh, he's probably going to Arizona, this and that. And I remember Chris Egan telling me, he's like, well, if you're here, probably I know where he's going. And I'm like, well, Chris, I just kind of showed it because I have nothing better to do on a Tuesday night. But with that being said, when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, yeah, Zoom is going to be a key part in the offense just the team moving forward next year. So making sure that these guys are getting more comfortable with their roles, because Tyler Harris should come back next year. Hopefully he doesn't, again, NIL transfer portal world. I'm not saying he's going to dip, but I'm just, you can never be too sure. And especially when you have players getting good at the end of the season, those are the other schools keep saying, hey, I wonder if we can get him. And I think having Danny Sprinkle as your head coach is going to prevent a lot of that, because he is building this thing out for a 2, 3, 4, 5-year run, not just a one and done type of run. And so I'm curious to see how much more play does Zoom get at the end of the season. How much do they kind of balance that Makai Mason, DJ Davis? I know Lewis is now suspended, so that doesn't play as much of a role. But you're absolutely right. The pieces are there to make it work. It would leave such a bitter taste, almost in a way, kind of like UW finishing 6 and 7 in football, where it's like, hey, good start. You're not terrible in terms of you're at least 500, but now you're below 500 because you lost. And it's like, hey, you didn't make the Big Ten tournament your first year. It's like, really, in the field of 18, you couldn't beat out 3 other schools? Like, Washington is better than being in the bottom third of the Big Ten right now.
Yeah.
They have not played like it, but the roster talent-wise is better. Chris Conway, Frank Capnon being out for most of the season does not help that cause. But you look at it and think, even in these next 3, 4, 5 games, you should go. I mean, this is also going to prove to Danny, you have to win on the road. You got to find it on the road, because you have, but you really need to start finding more, stacking those road wins.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing with this. We're going to Ohio State, going to Purdue. To Penn State. I was just checking the schedule, and I think it's 4 of the final 7 games are on the road. So you have to find a way to win some of these games away from home, which is something that has been a struggle so far this season. And you talk about building for the future. The other thing I wanted to make sure we mentioned was Dominique Diomande, where Danny Sprinkle was asked about him at his Monday press conference. And he said, yeah, I wouldn't expect much if I were you guys, where he's emphasized this point of, it's not fair to this 19-year-old to just throw him in, where he's been with the team for, I think, exactly a month. It's Tuesday, February 11th, as we record this. I think it's been just about a month since Dominique Diomande officially arrived, where he said, yes, if he's like, he needs to come in and earn his spot every day. He's not saying he's not. He's just saying that a lot of these guys have been working with this team since June. So it's a lot easier for me to just know exactly what they want to do, where they're going to be, and how they all just trust each other and have that chemistry. And that takes a little bit longer for anybody, truly, than just a month to get involved in. And with a guy like Dominique, yeah, you hope that he'd be able to make an impact down the stretch, because he would bring such a big boost to this program. But if Danny doesn't feel that he's 100% ready, it's better to leave him on the sideline for the time being, because it's one of those things where next year, with Matty Traore coming in down low, with some of these guards, with Nico Badalo next to him at probably playing the 4, and Cortland Muldrew and JJ Mandequit coming in as well, with a lot of these guys that you mentioned, Tyler Harris, Makai Mason, Zoom Diallo. If all these guys come back, all of a sudden this is you have the opportunity to make a really, really big jump.
You do, and I think it's an expected jump. And again, it's also, this is why it was important for Danny to get Dominique in the program, during this season. But that doesn't mean he has to play, because he gets to practice with Zoom, gets to practice with Jace, gets to practice with Frank, gets to practice, not with Curtis, but just be around and build that chemistry. So you're not doing it as, hey, well, we could have brought him in last year, but we're just going to wait and bring him in like April or May. It's like, no, get him on campus, get him in the building, so that way he can start to be comfortable and see, like you mentioned when he went to the Purdue game, seeing that atmosphere, seeing the atmosphere at Penn State, seeing the atmosphere in Columbus this week. Those are the moments where now next season, yeah, he might not have played this season, but the moment won't be too big. And also, I mean, I will say, like, the whole principle of the moment being too big for Dominique and throwing him into the fire, do play pro ball in France. I'm not worried about that.
Absolutely.
But from Danny is 100% right when he says, well, what's the benefit of throwing him in there? I mean, look, like after the Lakers traded for Doncic, he didn't just jump right in. He didn't play the first game. There was a couple of games he had in between. And so, yeah, it's like, look, yeah, you can either it's a proper coaching job that Danny is doing with Dominique, because a reprehensible job by a former UW coach that played football, that coached football, would throw him in the fire and say, hey, we're just going to throw you in and see what happens. Right. Not the good way to go. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason, so please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell. So you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.